Hezké odpoledne, dámy a pánové, já vás vítám na scéně Good Life, která je věnovaná životnímu stylu, zdraví, štěstí, pohodě, ale také hodnotám. A vlastně, když se takhle podíváte na to, co vám Meltingpot nabízí, a nejenom na scéně Good Life, tak zjistíte, že je tady spousta jmenovatelů, které nejenom, že jsou společné těm různým přednáškám, ale jsou také společné nám jako lidem, protože každý z nás má nějaké své hodnoty, každý z nás po něčem touží, každý chce být zdravý, chce zdraví pro své blízké, každý z nás, aspoň si tedy myslím, že každý z nás chce být šťastný. A i když třeba kouknete na jiné přednášky, před chvilkou tady byl Amit Goswami nebo John Perkins, tak stejně zjistíte, že všechno to, co se tady děje, o čem se mluví třeba i v rámci celého světa na Global Stage, se týká toho, že někdo chce být šťastný, bohužel někdy na úkor někoho jiného. Takže jak tedy najít to svoje osobní štěstí, jak to udělat asi rychle, jak to udělat jednoduše, a jakým způsobem na tom pracovat každý den, tak to nám řekne další host, který zde pořádá tedy workshop, je autorem bestselleru, a teď doufám, že to tedy řeknu správně, Hygge and Lykke, Meik Wiking. Welcome to Czech Republic.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Well, Mike, it's easy. We want to be happy.
Yeah.
Give us the key.
Okay.
You have 1 hour.
But you know what they say the key to happiness is?
The key to happiness?
Yeah. Low expectations. Okay?
Okay, I go sit down and I will something do with my
Very
expectations.
good. Very
Enjoy
good.
it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for coming and for that lovely introduction and welcome. First of all, an apology. English, like many of you, is not my first language. I speak Danish. The trouble is when I speak English, I need to concentrate more, so I get this really grumpy look on my face, which is not good when you are a happiness researcher. I'm going to be looking at my phone from time to time. It's not to check Instagram. It's just I have my notes on here, so I'll be following them. I also have some slides, which I would love to see up here, if it's possible. We'll get some slides, I'm sure, in a second. There we are. Very good. So, besides from writing about Hygge, and well done on the pronunciation, I work with happiness research. So I come from the Happiness Research Institute in Copenhagen, and basically we are trying to solve 3 basic questions. We try to figure out why some people are happier than others, how we can improve quality of life, but ultimately we also try to understand how can we measure something as difficult as happiness. It's also what I'll be talking a little bit about today. I also have another session later this afternoon. I hope to see many of you there as well. So I know when you work with happiness research, a lot of people imagine that our office is full of ice cream and puppies. That's unfortunately not the case. We work a lot with statistics, with numbers, and try to basically have a scientific approach to happiness. Just one question, if I talk at this volume, am I talking loud enough for you in the back? Very good, very good. We have an hour together. I'll leave some time in at the end for questions. This field usually includes a lot of questions from the audience. There's a lot of questions and skepticism. I welcome that in terms of how we try to measure happiness and so on. I'll also involve you a little bit during this hour. I'll pose some questions and get you to address them with each other, and then we'll talk about afterwards some of your answers to my questions. Is that an okay plan? Very good. It's also too late to change it, so that's good. So usually one of the questions I get a lot is around the World Happiness Report. So once a year, the United Nations publish a report with a list or a ranking of the happiest countries of the world. It usually covers 155 countries. The Czech Republic, by the way, is 21st. Well done. But what we usually see is the Nordic countries, and especially Denmark, at the top of the list. Switzerland, Austria, New Zealand, Australia, Canada also do quite well. But usually it's Denmark that is in the first place. And of course, we've been interested in understanding why. And I think it's important to underline that when you hear that Denmark is the happiest country in the world, it's important to remember that this ranking and other rankings are typically based on averages. It's an average national happiness level, which means that you can call Denmark the happiest country in the world. You could also turn it around and call it the least unhappy country, right? Because we measure averages. And usually what we see is that these six factors explain why some countries are happier than others. I'll be going more into depth with them later this evening at 6:45. I have a keynote on these factors, and we'll be concentrating a lot on kindness. But these are all sort of political factors. These are about the welfare state. These are about equal opportunities for men and women. It's about social support. It's about healthcare and so on. And I needed to understand why is it that Denmark does better than the other Nordic countries. Because if you look at the Nordic countries, we all look the same when it comes to our welfare states. So we needed to start to look at why is Denmark just doing a little bit better than Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and Iceland. And that's why I started to look at culture. What is unique about the Danish culture? And what came up there was this little thing called Hygge. You pronounced it really well, Veronica. I think we all need to learn to pronounce it. So can we just all, when I count to three, on three, say Hygge? Okay? 1, 2, 3. Hygge. Very good. It's not a pretty language, but it is a very good language to describe these situations where we experience comfort, safety, feeling connected with other people, perhaps saving some simple pleasures. Because that is what Hygge is. Hygge has been called many things. One of the things, or my favorite definitions, is the art of creating a nice atmosphere. But I think, and this was actually coming down to the festival talking about this, was I think Hygge is also about kindness. Hygge is about being kind to other people, connecting with other people, creating a sense of togetherness, creating a sense of common history. But it's also about being kind to yourself. It's about giving your sort of overstressed, overworked achiever adult a break from all those demands. About letting go, about relaxing, about enjoying life. So I think there's also a connection between Hygge and kindness. So I think in order to better explain what Hygge is, I'll tell you a little story of what happened to me a few years ago. I was in Sweden with a group of friends, and it was a December, and it was cold, it was dark, and we had rented a cabin. And in the afternoon, when the sun was setting, we had been out hiking. We came back into the cabin, and we lit a fire. There was a fireplace, and we also turned on a stove. We had a stew prepared. We turned that on, and those were sort of the sounds you could hear: the fireplace, the stew boiling. And we were also just relaxing in our comfortable clothes, enjoying each other's silent company, maybe having a bit of wine. And then one of my friends said, "Could this be any more hyggelig?" And one of the girls replied, "Yes, if there was a storm outside." Because hygge is also this feeling of being sheltered from the outside. But to me, that was sort of the epitome of hygge. And I thought it was a Danish thing. I thought it was a Scandinavian thing. Because to us, it's a key cornerstone of Danish culture. But then I wrote a book about hygge. And I didn't know how well it would do. I had written other books before. I wrote a book about happiness a few years ago. It was printed in 2,000 copies. I have 1,500 of those copies lying at home still. They are all yellow. I called it my yellow mountain of shame. So I thought, okay, if this book sells 600 copies, I'm doing better than the old one. But it sold 1 million copies, and it's translated into almost 40 languages now. And I think it's because what we did with Hygge was we gave people around the world a language and a word to appreciate something they were already doing in the first place. What I realized was Hygge is, of course, not a uniquely Danish thing. It's not something that Danes have a monopoly on. Coming together, enjoying good food, good wine with good people. Of course, that's a universal thing. Of course, that is something we all enjoy. And I remember a French mother wrote me that I've been having Hygge all my life. I just didn't know there was a word for it. So I think what we did was we gave people a language and a word to appreciate something they were already doing in the first place. Perhaps what is uniquely Danish is how much we talk about Hygge. It's almost sort of a Tourette's syndrome. We cannot help talk about it. So I'll invite you over for dinner on Saturday, and during the week we'll talk about how hyggelig Saturday is going to be. Then on Saturday we'll talk about how hyggelig this is, and next week we'll talk about how hyggelig Saturday was. So we talk about it constantly, and we also see it as a key value of our culture. Perhaps the same way that Americans see freedom as a cornerstone of American culture, Danes see Hygge as a cornerstone of ours. But it's not a uniquely Danish thing. I think another reason why Hygge became tremendously popular is that a lot of us have a feeling that we have gotten richer as societies, as people, without getting happier. We've been looking for happiness in the wrong places. So this is a picture of Seoul in South Korea. This is from 1960, what Seoul used to look like. I was there a couple of years ago. Now it looks like this. So South Korea have achieved a tremendous growth over the past 50 or 60 years. And they've gone from one of the poorest countries to one of the richest countries. But they really failed to convert that wealth, that money, into well-being. So they have massive issues with stress, with high level of suicide, with all sorts of sources of misery. And I think this is a poster child for this feeling a lot of us have been having around the world. We have gotten richer without getting happy. And I think that's why more people and more countries are looking towards Scandinavia, because there's a growing realization that those countries are doing something right when it comes to creating good conditions for good lives. So Hygge, as mentioned, is many things. It's togetherness, it's equality, it's pleasure, it's relaxation, it's atmosphere. It's all these things. There's a lot of focus on lighting in Denmark. Of course, there's some famous Danish design icons in terms of lamps, but there's also a lot of focus on candles. It's actually something that occurred to me when I was doing research for the book, that Danes have a love affair with candles. And we do that because candles are great at creating the atmosphere in the room. So what we see is that Danes, we burn twice as many candles as number 2 in Europe, which is Austria. We burn around 3.5 kilograms of candle wax per year. There's also a lot of fires in Denmark. But it's very good for the hygge. Not the fires, but the candles. So, interestingly, after I had written about hygge, I spoke to a Canadian journalist who's called Jannik. And he had read Hygge, and because of the focus on candles, he went out and he bought some chandeliers, and he started to light candles at home for dinner. And he and his wife, they have 3 sons, one boy who's 18 and 2 twins who are 15. And when Jannik, he started to light the candles for dinner, his boys, they started to tease him. You know, Dad, what's going on with the candles? You want to have some romantic time with Mom? Should we leave? But then after a while, he noticed that suddenly the boys, they started to light the candles. And more importantly, he says, now their family dinners, they last 15 to 20 minutes longer because the candles puts the boys in a storytelling mood. So instead of just sitting down and shoveling down their food, they enjoy the conversation, they talk about their day. And I think it's interesting to see how little changes in the way we set up family dinner can change how a family interact. And I think that's the power of candles. But it's not all about the candles, but it's part of it. So a big ingredient in Hygge is togetherness. It's connecting with other people. It's also been called socializing for introverts. It's not this American high-powered networking session, but it's a session where we all feel comfortable with who we are and when we feel we are part of a tribe. And interestingly, when we look at togetherness, it's one of the factors that best explain why some people are happier than others. Do we feel we have somebody in our lives we can rely on in times of need? And I think this is also where Hygge and happiness connects with kindness, helping other people connect with our tribe. So I think when it shows how we can create these arenas for togetherness, I think Shani's story is a great example of that. So Shani is the lovely woman on the right. She's Australian, and she lives in a suburb to Perth in Western Australia. And her story, I think, is an example of how kindness can change a street into a community. So she lives in a little street called Holbert Street, and she became worried because there was an elderly lady also on the street, and they became concerned about, you know, what if she falls? What if something happens to her? What can she do? So they decided to create a street directory. So with names and phone numbers of people living on the street. So this elderly lady could call somebody if she fell. That was an act of kindness. But what Shani did was also not just ask about phone numbers and names of people on the street, she also asked about people's interests and what people needed and what they could give. So a young boy said, well, he would love to babysit dogs and cats if people needed a babysitter for those. There was also a man who said, I need people to help me eat mulberries, because in the mulberry season I have too many. But she also noticed there were 3 ladies who were interested in singing. And there was an ex-choir mistress. So they formed the Holbert Street Choir. And that became the first thing that changed the street into a community. So now they have movie nights. They have pizza nights. There's a common pizza oven, and they bake pizzas. And I'm really not sure what this is, but it looks really fun. They also have a community garden, a common garden. They even have a goat that goes across several of the lawns. And I think all kids should grow up on streets with goats. But I think this is an example of how a simple act of kindness can take a street and turn it into a community. So that's just one example, but I would love to hear other examples. So now we'll spend about 3 minutes, go together 2 and 2, 3 and 3, whatever suits, and have a chat about how we can increase our sense of social support, connection, and belonging and togetherness. Okay? And then we'll talk about it as a group afterwards, okay? So 3 minutes, go together with the people around you, even if people you don't know, that's fine. They're kind too. And then we'll take it up as a group afterwards, okay? Understood? Good, go. All right. Very good to hear so much conversation. I've started something I cannot stop now. I realize that. That's fine. I would love to hear what you talked about. Maybe we have a couple of microphones we can pull around the room. We have one. Thank you very much. Do you want to share with us what you talked about? Yeah. Please.
Well, we focused mainly on a very similar topic, something as neighbor sharing, as you shown us. Basically, my idea was that if the adults are not able to connect, so at least allow the children to connect with a small playground or anything, a small patch of grass where at least the children could get to know each other. Or there was also a motion from this kind lady next to me who said that there's like some street markets where there's an assigned street that fixes up some foods or sweets or anything, and then people go to that market and they get to talk to each other. That's basically the same thing. But
great. But I like the idea of the children also. What we saw also on this street was there was a skateboard ramp, which really connected the kids. They love that. Thank you. Other ideas? Show of hands. We have one gentleman over there. Oh, sorry. Yes, we have one here as well. Yeah.
We spoke about several subjects. The first is that many supermarkets and hypermarkets, they just throw out food instead people that need the food. For example, moms with kids which need without fathers, they are in social need. They wouldn't be happy for this. So there are programs for alimentary banks. Then we talk about many people in homes. They throw out food, but maybe some other would like to have vegetables from garden, etc. Or clothes for kids, which they grow up from the clothes, so we can share it with neighbors. And in our street, we make several times in a year we make a party together, barbecue, and some small theater for kids, and so make just to be all together. It's very, very nice.
Very nice. And I like the idea of, and maybe we do pass it up to the gentleman over there. I like the idea of volunteer work, or sort of helping other people instead of focusing on yourself. We see when people engage in kindness, either random acts of kindness or engaging in volunteer work, they report higher levels of life satisfaction, in part because they connect with other people. So I'll just move on. So the next one I wanted to talk a little bit about is presence. So in terms of being present in the moment, I think, like the rest of you, I also have a challenge with these ones, that they sort of grab my attention, and they are wonderful to, weapons of mass distraction, and we sort of often dive into them instead of being present and instead of connecting with the people we are actually with. And that sort of spoils the hygge. We can see when people, even though they have just placed the phone on the table, they feel that if my friend does that, I feel that, he's not really connecting with me, that there is this sort of escape route that he might take if he's not stimulated enough by our conversation. And I think of course, smartphones are here to stay, and they also bring a lot of good things in terms of connecting people across distances and across generations, grandparents connecting with grandkids and seeing what they're up to. But we can also see that smartphones, social media, do have negative effects on our both kindness, but also on our happiness. So we ran a study or an experiment a couple of years ago at the Happiness Research Institute. This is the most boring slide, by the way, but this is really interesting as well. So I'll tell you what happened. So we got around 1,100 people to sign up for our experiment. And then we ran our happiness metrics on them. So we asked them how happy they were, how much they connected with other people, their sense of purpose, what kind of emotions they experienced on a daily basis. And then we divided them into 2 random groups. So we would say, okay, this group, your control group, you continue to do as you usually do, go on Instagram and Facebook as much as you want, and you are the treatment group. So we will ask you to take a week's break from social media. And after 1 week, we ran our happiness questionnaires, our happiness surveys on them again to see whether there was any changes. And to be honest, when we first did the study, I didn't think we would see any impact because it was just 1 week. And part of the reason why we thought social media could have a negative impact is that when we look at social media, we are exposed to how other people present their perfect lives. I don't know about you, but when I go on Instagram and Facebook, all I see is people running Ironmans and getting married and on perfect vacations in Hawaii, right? Usually on the same day. And I think it's a really tough background to compare your life against, right? I log on and people are oh so happy and I'm working late and having leftovers. That's my usual life. So we thought, okay, people compare themselves to other people. That's a negative effect. That's why they report lower levels of life satisfaction. I didn't think we would cancel that out with just 1 week's break from Facebook, because most people have been on Facebook for many years, and I think our perception of how other people live their lives is something that have been created over a period of years. So just 1 week, I didn't think we would see any effect. But we did see actually quite a bit of effect. On every indicator in terms of life satisfaction, in terms of quality of life we measured, there was an improvement in terms of happiness for the treatment group, for the people that have been without Facebook. I'm sure all of those people are back on Facebook these days. Because I think there is some instant gratification with the little red flags we see when we go on, and we're also curious about what other people are doing. But I think we probably need to figure out a better way of using social media and smartphones that we are currently using. And I think there is a Danish boarding school that is an interesting case in this arena. So in terms of handling social media, they go to quite drastic means. They have students from 14 to 16. And when the students arrive, they take all the smartphones. Usually when I tell this to kids, they're horrified. But they take the smartphones, and then they are allowed the devices 1 hour per day. And they can go on Instagram, and Snapchat, and whatnot. But for 23 hours a day, they are without the phone, they're without the digital devices. And after 6 months, it's put to a vote among the students. Should we continue with this system, or should everybody get their phones back? And 80% of the students vote to keep the system in place. Because they experience when none of us have our phones, we actually connect with the people we are with instead of being present on social media. So I think this is a really interesting case. And of course, what we need to get to is sort of critical mass for analog play. If you're the only kid without your phone and all your friends are playing with them, of course, then it's quite boring. But if we can get schools, or if we can get streets together, perhaps say on Fridays, all the kids are without the phones, run out and play, connect with other people, play nice, play kind, then I think we could create a perhaps better habit around social media. So that's one example. I'm very curious to hear whether you have other ideas in terms of what we can do to perhaps not be so constantly on our phones. So this time we'll only spend 2 minutes. Okay, like before, you can go together with the group you were before or new people, and then we'll talk about it afterwards. Okay, 2 minutes. All right. That was 2 minutes. Very good. A lot of chatter. And not a lot of phones out. Very good. So, is there somebody who would like to share with us what you talked about? Don't be scared. All people are kind in the room. Yep. Yes.
So we said that the thing we could do right here, right now, to be more present is to really forget about the phones when we are at the concerts. Don't take pictures and videos, just enjoy the moment and the music and feel it with all your senses. The same way is dance or whatever you do, just focus on it. It's hard, it's an exercise, but it's good to give it a try. And another way of how to become more present is the meditation. It's not for everyone, it's tough to persuade yourself to sit a couple minutes a day, but it's worth trying, and I'm put myself this goal in my near future to really do it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And the thing on meditation, it made me think of an initiative I heard from, they do in Bhutan. So some of you might be familiar with Bhutan. It's a small country, Eastern Himalayas. I know we have an expert on Bhutan in here somewhere. But what is special about Bhutan is that they have focus on gross national happiness. So instead of gross national product, are we getting richer? They look at, are we getting happier? And what they do in some of their schools is exactly that. It's a mindfulness exercise. They start out their school days with a mindfulness exercise. They call it brain brushing, not brain washing, but brain brushing. And it seems to have positive effects both on academic performance and sort of students' well-being. So thank you for that.
Hi, I'm a teacher at a secondary school, and after 6 years at maternity leave, I came back and I could see a very significant change, how much the students became addicted to their phones. And I was very happy at the same time when in one class with 12 years old, because the teachers and also the parents complained that the students spend so much time on their mobiles. So they discussed that at least for the main break, which takes 20 minutes, the phones are banned. They do it voluntarily because they discussed it. And instead of that, they play table tennis in the classroom, or they chat, or they play board games, and so on. So I think it's a very good idea. Yeah. But
Very
in
good.
older classes, you can really see, even during the class, like they are not focusing because they, the phone under the desk and playing games. And
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a big problem at schools.
Maybe we need a basket just inside the door, a parking lot
Yeah,
for
exactly.
phones.
Exactly. That's
For
what I
the-
tell them. If they continue, I really take the basket, because even the director told us if you need to do that, because I teach English, so we use the phones for some games, for example, or as a dictionary. But for other subjects, they really recommend the teachers take a basket and take the phones away, because otherwise it's very hard to control.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Listen, I'll just move on a little bit so we have time for some questions. I want to make sure we reach that. So another component in Hygge is equality. So preferring we over me instead of hijacking the highlight. Understanding that we are all here as equals. To me, equality is also about kindness. Not necessarily putting yourself first, but putting other people first sometimes. And we see equality has a positive impact on happiness. We see countries where men and women are equal are happier. We also see that in a lot of different studies. When we look at inequality, negative impacts in terms of mortality, obesity, crime, murder rates, inequality is one of the worst things that can happen to a society. But I think one of the most fun studies on the negative effects of inequality was on the phenomenon called air rage. So you guys, you might be familiar with road rage. You're driving around, you're going to Prague, and then somebody cuts you off, and you're like all angry. That's road rage. Air rage is when passengers act out on planes. When one passenger tries to strangle another passenger because he was reclining his seat, or there was also an incident of a passenger removing his pants for the entire flight for some reason. That is air rage. And so a group of scientists have looked at under what circumstances do these events of air rage happen. Is it when the seats are small? Is it when the flight is delayed? What is it? And yes, it does also happen more frequently when planes are delayed, but they also looked at the design of the cabin. So in a cabin, you can have a first class. And if there is a first class in the cabin, on the plane, that means that there is inequality. There's somebody in a better seat than me. There's somebody who gets a better meal than me. That's inequality on a very micro level. And what they found was if there is a first class cabin on the plane, the likelihood of air rage is twice as big. And when I heard that, I thought, or when I read the study, I thought, it's just because it's on the long flights, there is a first class cabin. On the shorter flights, you don't have a first class cabin. But they also looked at where the first class, or how passengers board the plane. And as you know, you can essentially board the plane in two ways. You can board the plane from the front, and if you are flying monkey class, as I usually am, you walk through first class. And you see the big seats, and you see them drinking the champagne, and then you get into monkey class. And then the second option to board the plane is in the middle of the plane. And if you're in monkey class, you walk right, and you're not exposed to paradise in the first class. And they could also see if you board the plane from the front, go through first class into monkey class, again, there's a twice as big likelihood of air rage. I just thought that was a really great study in terms of negative impacts of inequality. And I think it shows the importance of treating everybody equal in terms of happiness, hygge, but also kindness. So when it comes to equality, I think that's why it's important to underline that hygge should be free. I know lately, because of an interest in hygge, a lot of companies have moved into the scene and made hygge about things, and made hygge about indoor products, and made hygge about luxury candles. That's not what hygge is about. I even had an American journalist call me saying, if I want hygge, what is the first thing I should buy? I'm not sure you got it right. Hygge is an atmosphere. Hygge is about being kind to others, being kind to yourself. It's about togetherness, it's about relaxation, it's not about things. But I think with hygge happened what happens when other things become popular. With mindfulness, suddenly we get mindfulness plates, or when yoga became popular, then suddenly you could buy $100 yoga pants. That's not what yoga is about. And the same with hygge. Suddenly there is a lot of companies moving into that field. But remember, hygge should be free. And I think that's also why it's important to focus on activities where we can enjoy life, where we can enjoy well-being without having to pay anything. I love finding those activities. So last week, one of my favorite activities was just behind the place I was staying. We found a huge area of wild cherries. And we went cherry picking. One of the highlights of the week. And also just lying in a hammock reading a book. Those were some of the highlights from my vacation last week. But I think it's an important question to pose of all of us. How can we decouple wealth and well-being? What kind of activities can we explore? What kind of activities can we engage in that doesn't cost anything? And try to remove the power that money usually have on our happiness. I had planned we should do an interactive session for this part, but I want to make sure we have time for questions in the end, so I'll just skip this and move ahead. Because I think we can learn some inspiration from Michelle in this sense. So Michelle is a journalist who lives in London, and she tried to go 1 year without spending any money. So she spent money on her mortgage, she spent money on sort of basic necessities that she needed, but anything additional, going to the gym, going to the movies, going to the pub, having a beer with her friends, she cut that out. And she tried to see how she could spend less and basically live more, as she writes. And I think her case is probably an extreme case. She experienced that the way she has been organizing her social life have been around activities that are pricey, that is going to the restaurant, that is going to the pub. And she found that she probably needed to organize her social life in a little bit different way. And of course, her case is an extreme case, but I think it's an interesting case for most of us to explore what kind of activities can we engage in that are free, that are fun, that can bring us together, that can make us kind to one another, that do not necessarily have to cost anything. I think that is something important to highlight. But Hygge is about these things. It is about atmosphere, it's about connecting with other people, it's about savoring simple pleasures. And first and foremost, I do think it's about being kind to other people and being kind to ourselves. So I think that's the words I want to leave you with. If you are interested in diving more into the factors of happiness, why some countries, why some people are happier than others, I'll be again, I think, on this stage at 6:45, where we will look more at the sort of welfare models. All right, guys, I think that was all we had time for. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for input and for bearing with my grumpy face. Okay?
Meik Wiking, thank you very much.
Thanks.